Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Growing Your Event Program with Flat Resources. My name is Mike Dietrich, and I'm going to be joined in just a few minutes by our featured speaker. But let me start by just saying I'm very excited about today's topic. Look, our industry has kind of perpetually been in a do more with less cycle, but this one feels especially severe. Event programs are certainly growing. Our event team here at Cvent calls them revenge events. But budgets and team size are really struggling to keep up given the intense focus on profitability. We certainly hear this from our customers. We certainly feel this ourselves in our own event program. And so how are organizations responding? How are your peers handling all this? Late last year, we commissioned a study with Forrester Consulting to try to find out. When we asked a set of global event and marketing leaders and decision makers how they're rethinking their event teams, how they're rethinking the technology behind their event program, and how they're trying to better demonstrate impact of those event programs so they can get more teams size, so they can increase in budget. So that's what we want to talk about today. We're going to spend about 45 minutes to share how your peers are navigating all of this. And then we very much look forward to taking your questions at the end. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. On the right side of your screen, please join the chat. Share your thoughts and comments with others on the webinar today. And please do submit your questions in the Q&A tab. Conrad and I look forward to taking those at the end. If you are interested in downloading the slide deck that we'll share today and learning more about this topic through a great white paper called Scaling Your Event Program from Forrester, click on that resource tab to your left. So we've got a lot to navigate, and that's why I'm thrilled to be joined today by our featured speaker, Conrad Mills. Conrad is the principal analyst at Forrester, and the author and the brains behind this work. And so, Conrad, let me hand it over to you quickly to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Mike, and it's great to be here with you today. And yeah, like you say, I'm an analyst at Forrester. I've been there for coming on for 5 years now. And my focus research area at Forrester is everything around business-to-business events. So I'm really looking forward to digging into some of the fantastic new data we've got with everyone today.
Well, fantastic. And thank you again, Conrad, and to the team there for helping us field this and make sense of all this. Some really interesting things to share. So, Conrad, maybe before we start, let me start by taking a look at the big picture here. Specifically, when we looked at what leaders' expectations were for their event program, what was the mindset out there? And so, remember, this reflects the views of leaderships. These folks are setting the strategy for the event program. They're setting the budget for the event program. And I think the first thing that struck most of us as we looked at the data here was there starts with a growth mindset out there. When you look at the first 3 respondents, what are you trying to accomplish with your meeting and event program? These 3 first areas are all around growing, scaling, increase, more. And so these first 3 things are what I typically refer to as, these are the hit the gas metrics. So the event leaders are certainly wanting to grow their programs and do more. But when you look closer at the data, immediately after that was what I call the tap the brake metrics. We need to be smart. We need to have greater visibility into what we're doing. We need to execute this amount of spend and all these events a little bit more efficiently. And so immediately you see the tension here, Conrad. We've got to scale. The leaders' expectations are we got to scale, we got to do more, but we need to do so efficiently. And the other thing that's kind of sitting right there at 45 is, oh, and by the way, with that ROI statement, we need to prove that all of this is working. So, and against all of this is a backdrop of event programs that, Conrad, don't seem to be getting any smaller or simpler. So maybe we start with you there. Let's start by taking a look at what that event mix looks like in 24. And start talking about what is on event organizers' plate this year.
Sure. And maybe we just step back for a moment and we just think about the massive change that the whole event sector has been through over the last 4 years. We had the pivot to and refinement of virtual, the emergence of hybrid, and then the kind of re-emergence of in-person events. And almost immediately we got hit by that massive spike in inflation, which saw the cost of hosting and attending an in-person event increase by over 25%. And then more recently, we've started to see the emergence of AI and generative AI in particular, which heralds the next wave of transformation. So, there's been a lot going on in the event sector over the last few years. But through all of this, events have maintained and even increased their relative importance within the marketing mix. In the Forrester Event Trends survey earlier this year, 49% of CMOs told us that events were now more important to them and their organizations than they had been pre-COVID. So it's not surprising that we see that enterprises are organizing over 260 events every year. The point I'd make about this, though, is that the mix of those events has changed. The formats, we're seeing new formats become increasingly important. So there's continued change.
So let's take a little bit of let's dig deeper into that mix change, because as you just suggested, Conrad, it doesn't just seem to be a picture of more events, right? The mix is changing. Some formats and types are growing and others aren't. But in any case, it doesn't look like the mix is getting any simpler to execute.
No, it's not. And what the data tells us is that there are two event formats in particular which are growing faster than others. So I'll just spend a little bit of time talking about those. And there's a couple of other event formats I'll comment on as well. So the two fastest growing event formats that we see are the smaller hosted in-person events and webinars. And with smaller hosted in-person events, you can see from the slide, 58% of organizations are planning to do more of these smaller, more targeted, less resource intensive events. We often see these being run as roadshows, which also has the benefit of limiting the distance that an attendee needs to travel. Now, I was talking to one event leader recently that's made this type of event a real focus. And he's taking a very data-driven approach to these events, and he's built up a list of prospective attendees from strategic accounts who live within a 2-hour driving range of the metropolitan area where they're hosting those events. The other thing with these events as well is that budget isn't having the same impact as it's having with other event formats. So you can see from the graph on the bottom right of the slide, even organizations where their event budgets are going down by over 5%, we still have more than 50% of them saying they plan to host more of these small hosted in-person events. Now, the second format that's growing particularly quickly are webinars, and we define these as single session, sub 60-minute virtual digital events. And we've got just under half of all organizations saying they're planning to run more of these events over the next 12 months. And these are a particular focus for both medium-sized organizations and also, as you can see on the slide, for organizations in North America, where over half of all the enterprises we surveyed said they plan to host more webinars. And what I see with webinars when I talk to clients that are particularly successful is that they've got a very prescriptive approach to their webinars. They're very data-driven, and they've set up a really regular cadence around that. There was one organization in particular I was talking to recently that had taken that approach and have managed to shift from running ad hoc webinars where they were getting maybe 20 to 30 attendees to a regular cadence every 4 to 6 weeks and getting around 500 attendees per webinar. I'd maybe just call out a couple of other formats on this slide as well. So the third event format where we're seeing more marketers saying they're going to be doing more of these rather than less are sponsored third-party events. And these are interesting because elsewhere in the survey, we got a majority of response actually telling us that owned hosted events performed better than third-party events, yet still we have There are a large number telling us they're going to be doing more moving forward. And what I often see is that this is a particular focus for smaller organizations where maybe they don't have the same resource and capabilities to run their own hosted programs, and also they don't necessarily have the brand to attract attendees to their own events. The final event format I'll just comment on is hosted hybrid, because I think coming out of the pandemic, there was this kind of expectation almost that all of our tier one tentpole events were going to be these simultaneous in-person and virtual hybrid experiences moving forward. And that's not the case, and that's what the data on this slide is showing us. What I've seen with the clients that I've been working with over the past 12 months or so is that hybrid has changed, and organizations are now focused on streaming a portion of their in-person events live to a virtual audience. It may be the opening address, some of the keynote content, but otherwise the focus is much more on capturing as much of the content digitally as they can for on-demand viewing and post-event reuse and repurpose.
Yeah, makes total sense. Making sure you're leveraging all the content investment that went into that marquee event. So, Conrad, that's certainly a lot on their plate, right? They've got these organizations are looking at their core mix. Some of these formats and types are growing. Apart from the obvious execution challenge that presents, what else are their leaders asking them for? Because it looks like the data says that simply getting that event executed just isn't enough anymore.
No, it's not. And the number one priority is clearly demonstrating the value of events. We've got 95% of respondents telling us that they need to demonstrate ROI. And actually, for organizations under severe budgetary pressure, so their event budget is falling, that figure actually rises to 98%. And I'm seeing clients take really innovative approaches to measurement. There was one organization I was talking to recently, and the team there know that they need to deliver sales meetings from the events program, but they also know that they need to deliver those at a specific cost and to a specific quality level so that the right number convert into opportunities downstream and they're able to hit their ROI goal. And they've effectively kind of set up an event funnel where they're measuring all of that activity and coming up with an ROI measure at the end of that. Now, connected to ROI, we've got maximizing the value of data, because without high quality data, you're not going to be able to measure ROI. And I know data, Mike, is something we're going to be talking about again later today. Another area that I would call out, though, from the priority list is improving post-event attendee engagement. And we actually see this in a couple of areas. There's the immediate post-event attendee follow-up, which is a focus for 92%. But also, if we look slightly lower down the list, we've got the idea of extended year-round attendee engagement, where organizations are starting to think about how they can drive longer-term engagement with event attendees over an extended period. The final area that I actually call out from the priority list is personalization. And 3/4 of respondents identified this as a priority. And we know from an attendee and a business-to-business buyer perspective, this is increasingly important. What was interesting was when we focused in on high growth companies and those companies which are using events to power the growth of their organizations moving forward, they are making this a real focus. If you look at the graph on the right of this slide, 90% of those organizations are prioritizing attendee personalization moving forward. If we go into the next slide, though, there's one other area that I think it's interesting to look at, and that's actually right down at the bottom of the priority list. It's kind of the area of ESG, because this appears to become less of a focus than maybe it was a year or so back. We've got less than half of all the respondents telling us they're interested in reducing the environmental impact of their events. And you're only just over half saying that maximizing inclusivity and accessibility is a priority as well. So we dug into this data just to understand what was happening here. There were a couple of interesting findings that came out that you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. Firstly, there are some massive regional variations when it comes to these areas. So at the top on the right-hand side, we're comparing the view from EMEA with the view from North America. And you can see actually in EMEA, reducing environmental impact is a really big priority. 79% of organizations are telling us that this is something they're focused on, compared with just over a third in North America. And it's a similar picture with inclusivity and accessibility, although it's not, the gaps are closer. The other interesting angle to this, though, is when we start digging into the data and looking at differences at a functional level. And that's what we're doing on the graph on the bottom right-hand side. We're comparing the CMO perspective on these topics with the event leader perspective. And you can see that actually the CMOs are really not prioritizing these topics. We've got less than a quarter of CMOs telling us that reducing environmental impact is a priority, and just over a quarter saying that making their events more inclusive and accessible is a priority, compared with much larger numbers of event leaders. And actually from a CMO perspective, this is a missed opportunity. These areas impact really quite significantly on brand.
That's interesting. It's just, look, if you're out there managing a global event program, it feels like that's just another layer of complexity that you're gonna have to deal with. You've got events in certain markets where this is a primary consideration, maybe the venue that's selected or how you design the event, and you've got other geographies and other stakeholders where it's not as big a deal. So Conrad, so far we've painted a pretty tough picture, I think, for our audience out there. We've got larger event programs, we've got more event formats and types, we've got some of the vectors we just discussed around ROI as a priority, regional differences in priorities. So that takes us into how do we start thinking about putting an impact and an ROI picture together so some of these organizations can be more successful in getting additional budget, in getting additional headcount. And so this brings us to that unavoidable topic of data, Conrad. And to some extent, the industry seems to have always struggled with this question. Why do we think that this topic of data is now even becoming more important, or at least why are organizations taking a fresh look at it now?
Yeah, I mean, if we step away from events for a second, your access to audience data is becoming more restricted. Buyers are preferring to remain anonymous until later in their purchase processes. We've got new privacy restrictions coming, and in this environment, events represent an invaluable yet underutilized source of audience data. As you can see from the graph on the slide, buyers are almost universally happy to share their contact data when registering for an event in a way in which they're not with other forms of marketing engagement. But it's not just buyers' willingness to share the data through events that's important. It's also the quantity and the quality of that data.
Yeah, and Conrad, let's press into that for a second, because sometimes when you speak on this, or I know sometimes when I speak on this, people's eyes glaze over. It can be a confusing topic. Can you give us some practical examples about what that data quality looks like, what the quantity looks like? Where does this high value data live inside an event?
Sure. And what we've laid out in this slide here is a not untypical attendee data journey for an event. And I think there are around 25 different data capture opportunities that we've identified, incorporating the pre and post event phases. And actually, they're really important. You should probably be capturing around half of all of your event data at those pre and post event phases. So clearly there is lots of data here, but it's also high quality. This is a rich mix of zero and first party demographic, firmographic, and behavioral data. And if we think about the potential value of this data, there's clearly value to your events organization. It's going to help you measure the impact of your events. It's going to help you optimize execution. It's going to help you personalize the attendee experience. But the other point with event data is that it has much wider value to your organizations. It helps to drive stronger alignment with sales. It can act as an input to product development strategy. It can help augment demand and account-based marketing programs. So there is lots and lots of value in event data. The point that I always make, though, is that unless you've integrated your event technology with your wider sales and marketing technology stack, you're not able to extract that value.
Yeah, and Conrad, just a quick point on that. I think it's so important because I've done marketing broadly and then event marketing for over 20 years. And the expressed interest in the high quality data that lives in your event program, it's almost marketing malpractice not to use it, especially if as an organization you're struggling to make the business case for larger teams, make the business case for larger budgets. That often comes with a requirement to prove the impact and show how the event program is driving larger marketing metrics. This data that you just went through is, in my opinion, among the best quality and quantity of data to do that. But we spoke earlier today about how organizations are responding to all this complexity by rethinking. We talked about a few things, Conrad. We talked about how are they rethinking about their tech, the data they capture and how they use it, the team size and how it's structured. So let's get into that for a second. How are they getting it all done? Sounds like it starts by building that path to ROI. What does that picture look like?
It does, and the starting point is integration. If as I just said, if you're capturing all of this incredibly valuable data and it's residing in your event tech platform in a silo, you're not able to maximize the value of that. And I've been asking this question around integration across multiple surveys now for a number of years, and unfortunately, the needle just doesn't seem to move on this. In the data you can see on the slide here, we're showing that just 1 in 5 organizations have integrated their primary event technology platform with the map or their CRM. On a slightly more optimistic note, we've got around a third of organizations telling us that they're either in the process of doing this or plan to do this over the next 12 months. And there are lots of reasons why organizations have failed to integrate. Traditionally, event technology did sit in somewhat of a silo. That was my experience when I was a practitioner. But I also see event teams treating event technology as a tactical rather than a strategic asset. And by that, I mean the focus is very much on how they can use the technology to execute the event, rather than thinking about some of the bigger, more strategic value that can deliver to their organizations through the data that they're capturing.
So let's take a look at how they could start to action that, because it sounds like there are relationships and technical relationships and functional relationships that need to be built to make sure that data is shared correctly. Can we take a deeper look into that piece?
Yeah, sure. And the point I always make is that this is not something that event teams can do in isolation. It absolutely has to be a partnership between event teams and ops teams, marketing ops, sales ops, revenue ops. And to build an integrated infrastructure where you're maximizing the value of the data requires those teams to come together. And It should be the event team that's leading on the technology requirements, but then it should be the ops teams leading on the deployment and the integration of that technology, and then building the type of mature data strategy that you can see laid out on the slide here, where you're properly considering how you're capturing data across all of your events, not just owned, hosted, but third party, how you're going to process the data that you're capturing, where that's going to get unified, how you're going to analyze it. Is it going to be analyzed within those applications in that unified layer, or are you going to have a separate standalone BI layer? And then absolutely crucially, to maximize the value of the data, how are you going to activate it? So some of the things I was talking about earlier, how are you going to use that data within your broader demand and account-based marketing programs? How are you going to use it to help sales?
It is such a critical handshake to make across the function. Again, if organizations are out there trying to look at how to get all of this done, it probably starts with what this is worth doing. What are the highest impact events? What might we be able to get off our plate as we're being asked to do so much? And this seems to be the core foundational layer of getting that insight to understand what's working and what's not. Let me pivot for just a second then, Conrad, because one of the reasons maybe for the failure we see this continued headwind of event data and getting it integrated so you can make better decisions off it. Maybe one of the reasons here is the failure, that event tech itself has sat in the silos. There's just tons of it out there. That proliferation of technology that we've seen, to what extent is that a headwind here? To what extent is that a factor here?
Yeah, and I do think that's an additional factor. Event tech has proliferated over the last few years. As you can see from the data on this slide, around a quarter of all large enterprises now have 6 or more event tech solutions. And by the way, they're spending over $250,000 per annum in the process. And what this has resulted in is organizations ending up with overlapping, duplicative technology that's being deployed in silos. And that's resulting in wastage, inefficiencies, and also an inability to maximize the value of the data that we've just been talking about. The other point I'd make, actually, is that there is some internal misalignment around this. If you look at the 2 bars on the right-hand side of the slide, we're comparing the CMO perspective on the amount of technology inside their function with the event leader perspective. And you can see just 3% of CMOs believe they've got 6 or more solutions in play, compared to around a quarter of event leaders who know that they've got more than 6 solutions.
I think that's such a fascinating stat. The folks that have their hands on the tech stack every day, I think you're probably, Conrad, getting a lot of head nods in the digital world out there. As people that are joining our webinar today, it's like, yep, that sounds about right. I've got to get in and out of 10 systems to get my job done, and my CMO thinks it's just all one big thing. I know from our perspective, and we see this a lot, especially with our corporate customers, is that there's a lot of that emphasis on rationalizing this tech stack that may have gotten out of control over the last few years. It did, when we looked out at the global universe of planners and leaders out there. Is that what we heard? Is there a move to get out of this kind of API and event tech spaghetti?
To a degree, I'd say yes, there is. The data you can see on the slide here suggests that around 3/4 of all organizations believe it's critical or important to consolidate the amount of event tech that they're using. But there are some interesting nuances around this. If I just go back to that kind of CMO event leader dynamic, when we dug into the data, we could see that from a CMO perspective, they really didn't think it was a priority to consolidate the amount of event tech inside their functions. But when they're not aware of the amount of technology, they're not aware of the challenges around that, so they don't see the need for consolidation, and they also don't see the opportunities that that's going to present.
Interesting, because that would seem to be, if you looked at the big picture of how these organizations are responding, starting to bring the technology together to consolidate maybe one of the macro trends we're seeing out there to help these teams get more done. Why are they going that direction, Conrad? For those organizations that are starting to consolidate on the tech side, what are they hoping to accomplish from that?
Yeah, I mean, it does depend on the organization. You know, for many, it's going to be around efficiency. But equally, you know, as we can see from the data on this slide, it's about improving the scalability of event programs and also some of the other areas that we've been talking about, like measurement and ROI. The other thing that we often see when it comes to consolidation is that it's connected with a more general move towards centralization, and in some cases, setting up an event center of excellence.
Okay, that was too good of a transition, because let's talk about that for a second. If we're seeing one element around, there's technology consolidation, because I've got a bigger and more fragmented event mix that I've got to now deliver against with maybe flat budgets and flat teams. Having one system to do it all makes sense. But Conrad, you just brought up the other part of this topic, which I think is so interesting, and that's the emergence of, from a team perspective, how the technology, we talked about the technology piece, but how are the teams being organized, or maybe a better word is reorganized, to get all of this stuff done? So can you walk us through how we're seeing the teams starting to be restructured?
Yeah, I mean, in many organizations, events have been planned and executed in functional silos for a long time. You've got, you know, event teams, field teams, demand teams, sale teams, all running their own activity, using their own technology in some cases. And there's a growing realization that this leads to unnecessary waste and disconnected audience experiences. So we're starting to see a general move towards greater centralization, not just of technology, but of teams, as you've said, Mike. And there's kind of a couple of aspects to this. There's a move towards more centralized planning of events and centralized execution of events. And if we just think about centralized planning for a minute, what this enables teams to do is move away from treating events as siloed, isolated tactics and starting to take a longer term, more audience-centric view, where you're thinking about the journey that you want to take attendees on over a 12, 18-month time frame. And from a centralized execution perspective, it's helping you to scale your event activity and deliver that more consistently. And, you know, for some organizations, it's going to make sense to pull all of this together into one central center of excellence. And, you know, what the data on this slide is suggesting is that that is the direction of travel for a lot of organizations. We've got around 2/3 telling us that they've either set up a COE or they plan to set up a COE over the next 12 months.
It's interesting that is certainly, that's how we do this at Cvent. We've got our event program, Conrad, is we've got about 800 to 900 events we either host or attend every year as part of our own marketing mix. We have a center of excellence planning team here that does all that. I think that gives them the economies of scale to be able to execute a program at that scale. But there are probably many joining us today, Conrad, that aren't yet there, that haven't yet made that journey to a center of excellence. Can we spend just a second talking about what does that COE look like? What are the key elements of a COE?
Yeah, sure. There are three core elements to a COE. There's the people, the process, and the technology. And it's the people that are at the heart of the COE. And there's four core elements to consider here. Firstly, it's around the skills and capabilities that you need inside your team. And you need to talk to some of the key stakeholders in events around your organizations to understand what types of skills and capabilities you're going to need inside that team. Clearly, you're starting to centralize resources into a single team, and this gives you the opportunity to recruit some specialist roles potentially for the first time. Maybe the event tech leader, the event data and analytics leader, the event content strategist. Collaboration is also another key element from a people perspective, and that's both collaboration inside the COE, but also outside with those key stakeholders that we can see represented on the left-hand side of the graphic. And the final element from a team people perspective to consider is upskilling. I talk to a lot of teams where this really isn't a focus for them. I saw a data point the other day which suggested that I think it was 28%, just 28% of event planners have undertaken any form of AI training so far. So I think rolling out a COE gives you an opportunity to really focus on education, continuous learning, and potentially certification paths for team members. From a process perspective, again, 4 key elements to consider. Firstly, defining what best practice looks like for the event formats that you're going to be running out of the COE. And that's best practice across the pre, at, and post-event phases. So pre-event, what does best practice goal setting, measurement look like? Event marketing, audience acquisition. At event, what's best practice from an attendee experience perspective, even areas like sustainability and inclusivity that we were talking about earlier. And post-event, what's best practice in terms of content repurposing, measurement, post-event attendee follow-up. You also need to be developing standard statements of work for those core use cases that you're going to be running. And as part of this, maybe consider complying with some industry standards. Think about things like event blueprints, templates that can be shared around the organization. Alignment and governance, absolutely essential as well. We know that events work best when there is really strong alignment across core stakeholders. And it's down to the COE leader to drive this through open communication, but also things like SLAs, defining escalation procedures. Final element from a process perspective, balanced measurement. So ensuring that you're showcasing the value that you're delivering out of the COE. So moving away from what I would call vanity metrics, so things like number of registrants, number of attendees, and thinking more about measures that will demonstrate the value that you're delivering through your events. And the third element of the COE, technology. And as we were talking about earlier, this is not something that you should be managing in a silo inside the COE. This absolutely has to be a partnership with the revenue ops, marketing ops, sales ops teams, and you should be working together to select, deploy, integrate that technology so that you're able to maximize the value of data that you're capturing.
Interesting. So then it sounds like when we talked about the role of technology before, it looked like there was a consolidation, gravitational pull to consolidate largely for scalability. Conrad, when we look at why organizations are putting these COEs together, what benefits are they hoping for there? It looked a little bit more like this was a cost and efficiency play for many organizations.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of things. And again, it will depend on the particular circumstances of every organization. At a high level, the data suggesting that the move to centralize is driven by a desire for efficiency and cost savings. And given the budgetary pressures that a lot of organizations are under, this isn't altogether surprising. we've got data that shows only around a third of organizations have actually had an event budget increase this year. And realistically, unless your event budget has gone up by in the region of 8 to 10% for the last couple of years, because of the impact of inflation, in real terms, it's maybe flat at best. That's kind of one side of the equation. There are a number of growing organizations, though, that recognize the value that events are delivering in terms of helping drive continuous growth. And for those organizations where they're getting some pretty significant increases in event budgets, many of them are looking to COEs and centralization as a way to more effectively scale event programs so that they're able to drive that growth that they're looking for.
Yeah, interesting. So economies of scale here as well. So there's maybe a bit of a misperception that if you have a COE, Conrad, that COE has to do everything. Every event format, every event type needs to be planned, executed, technology purchased for at a central level. It looked like the data didn't quite show that, though, right? It looked like the role of the COE may change a little bit depending on the event type and the event format.
Yes, and it does. I've spoken to lots of organizations that have set up event COEs, and I don't think any two organizations have exactly the same setup. In some cases, they're managing different types of events outside of the COE. And what I would say, ideally, you want all of your core event use cases to be managed out of the COE, because it's by approaching it that way that you're better able to integrate the different events. You're able to build more long-term, audience-centric event strategies. But yeah, like you said, Mike, we do see some differences in terms of how different events are planned and executed. And in general, what the data on the slide suggesting is it's the larger, more complex, more resource-intensive events where we're seeing more centralization, more work getting done by the COE. Yeah. And for webinars and those smaller in-person events that we talked about at the start, we're seeing more local planning and execution of those. The point I'd make, though, around those smaller local events is that clearly, the local teams have to be involved. They've got the relationships with local sales. In some cases, they've got the relationships with the attendees. But there is a benefit to helping those teams through a COE. We know that they are overstretched. They're managing an awful lot of activity, whether it's campaign localization, local sales enablement, account-based marketing, local PR. And in-person events is the single area where they're spending most of their time. So any additional support that you can deliver to those teams out of a COE to reduce the burden, whether that's event blueprints, execution templates, events in a box, access to event technology, anything that you can offer them that's going to reduce that burden is going to help.
Yeah, and then on our final point on that piece, it looks like to the point you just made around centralizing the technology to be able to not only execute more efficiently the large ones, but also empower the field for the local events. Looks like that is very much in play here too.
It is, yeah. We do see different event use cases being approached differently. There's more local tech selection and management for those small in-person events, unsurprisingly. Whereas for those kind of bigger, hybrid, large in-person events, that tends to be managed more centrally. Again, the point I would make about tech selection and management is that unless you've got some level of central oversight here, you run the risk of ending up with large amounts of duplicative, overlapping technology sat in organizational and functional silos, the sorts of challenges that we were talking about earlier. So even if at an organizational level, you are heavily decentralized. I would encourage everybody to try to introduce some level of centralized oversight to their event tech selection and management.
Well, Conrad, that takes us to our final slide before Q&A. We've sure shared a lot of charts today. We shared a lot of data today. It's been a fascinating discussion. Orgs are consolidating their tech for cost and efficiency. They're centralizing teams for scale. I know that, Conrad, you spend a lot of your day talking to clients all over the world who are navigating all the changes we just talked about. And maybe we close with a couple of their stories and then take it off to Q&A.
Sure. Yeah, what I've done is just pull together a couple of quotes from organizations that show the benefit that they've had through that kind of centralization, consolidation, integration journey. And you can see, from the quote on the left-hand side, and I was talking to one event leader who had inside his organization, they had literally dozens of different platforms, and they've gone through a very thoughtful process of consolidation, and they've been piloting and testing different technologies, and it's taken them a number of years to end up with this single integrated consolidated infrastructure. But they're now using that for all of their customer facing events. The second quote on the right hand side talks to the benefits of integration, and the leader I spoke to there was explaining to me how the data that they captured at their events, all of the data, whether that was demos, conversations, even data from trivia sessions in theatre sessions, how all of that was flowing quickly and seamlessly to the inside sales team so that they could follow up post-event with attendees and have much more valuable and personalized conversations. And she also explained how that data was also delivering value more broadly to the marketing department because they were better able to understand attendee challenges, needs, and use some of that in their wider marketing activity. And the third and final quote on the slide down at the bottom just talks to the benefits of setting up a COE. I was talking to another leader who was explaining that he was looking to start running more of those kind of roadshow type events we were discussing right at the outset, but he didn't see any way to do that without having a COE in place. There would just be too much competition over resource. He saw a lot of risk, and ultimately he determined that the COE was the right way to go about that.
Fantastic. All right, well, Conrad, that brings us to the end of it, at least our prepared remarks. So first of all, I'd love to just want to thank you, Conrad, and the team at Forrester, and thank you all today for joining us. Let's head to Q&A real quick. I have a couple quick things before we hit Q&A. We do have Cvent Connect, which is our large user conference that's coming up here it starts next week. So if anybody would like to register and please register and join us virtually. A lot of great content. If you're an events professional, it's just a tremendous amount of great content and a great experience. If you're able to join us in San Antonio, we'd love to have you. Virtually would be great too. Also, if you would be interested in getting a $100 Amazon gift card, please sign up and to complete a demo with us, and we'll pop a link in the chat to that. And if you're interested, there's a $100 gift card on the other side of that for you. But Conrad, if we can, let's take the next 8 minutes or so and get right into Q&A. So let me take a quick look at the questions that we've got here. And Conrad, in no specific order, I'm just going to throw them out, and you and I are going to do our best. Okay, this is a good one. In your discussions with clients, Conrad, what data are they trying to get at? We talked a lot about data today. What data do they find most valuable in either proving ROI or improving their events?
Yeah, so I think the thing with data when it comes to proving ROI is that organizations often come to this at the end of the event, where they want to look back and showcase the value that they've delivered. And I've seen a lot of cases, they haven't set clear, measurable goals for their events. And actually, good measurement starts by setting really clear, smart goals. And then, understanding what kind of data you need to help understand how you're performing against those goals. It's really difficult to do that post event unless you've got super clear goals at the outset. I see teams using data in different ways, though, from an event perspective. Clearly, measurement is part of it, but also I see teams using data to optimize event execution, some cases in real time, where they're now checking data to understand if there are challenges around the event, if people are asking the same questions, and using it for real time optimization.
Great. Okay, let's take another one. I think this is a good one. So I'm going to kind of try to combine a couple questions here, Conrad. You and I'll do the best we can. We talked about centers of excellence today, and we talked about trying to start one, form one, as for the promise of being able to do more with less. Where do you start with a center of excellence? And we've got some folks in the chat and in the question that have smaller teams. In some cases, somebody's just said they're one-person team. Where do you start with a center of excellence?
So I think there's kind of like a three-step process you need to go through. The first is defining the remit of the COE. What is it that you're going to be delivering? Talking to key stakeholders in events and building a RACI. What is the COE going to be responsible for? What are you going to be accountable for? How are you going to partner with the other teams around the organization which are involved with events? So that's the first thing. The second thing is undertaking an audit of what you're doing at the moment. And that's an audit of event activity, event teams, event processes, and event technology to help identify gaps, inefficiencies, where you've got overlaps. And then the third thing that I recommend doing is then using all of the input to then write some form of event COE charter where you're laying out your vision for the COE, what it is you're going to be delivering, what are some of your success measures. So those are the three things I'd encourage you to do.
All right, here's another one, and maybe I'll take this one first, Conrad, and let me know if you have anything to add. One just came in. Hi, I work for an SMB tech reseller, and we don't have the budget for a CRM right now. Right, so they don't have a CRM platform right now. What do you recommend for us to get the most out of our data? In a situation like this, what I would recommend is start small. Your challenge is not integration yet. You don't have a back end to integrate it to, but it sounds like you'd be best served first by understanding some core data about your event programs. Get a baseline. What events are we doing? Do you have your arms around all of them? I would even start with just what events are we doing? Do we have visibility into each of them? Then start with the very basics of cost, number of attendees, and then probably put together a brief, simple attendee satisfaction survey. That would be a good foundation just to build on. What events are we doing? How many people came through? What was the satisfaction level of that? Conrad and I talked today about the tremendous amount, quality and quantity of data that sits in those programs. A CRM and a marketing technology stack can really explode the value of that. But if you're not there yet, start by understanding what events did we do? What did they cost? Who came? And what was the attendee satisfaction out of that? That is a great place, I think, to start this discussion around event data. If you don't have a sophisticated back end to drive a lot of the attribution stuff that Conrad and I were talking about today. Conrad, is there anything you add to that?
I would think think about who's going to get value from that data and how you're sharing it with them. Clearly you're not going to be sharing it through a CRM, but you should still be looking to share that data with stakeholders that are going to get value from it. So anybody that's on the front line selling is going to benefit from understanding, who's attended events, what they were interested in, how they responded to surveys. So think about how to share the data as part of that strategy.
Fantastic. Okay, Conrad, we are coming right up at time, and I'm always very cognizant of the fact that we have a bunch of very busy event professionals and organizers on the other side of this. So I want to make sure we get folks out on time. First of all, just let me say a final thank you to all of you that joined us today. Really appreciate you spending an hour with us. I know your days are packed, and appreciate you dedicating an hour to this. Conrad, again, a final thank you to you and the team, and look forward to seeing you all very soon. Again, if you can make it, either in person or virtually to Cvent Connect. Conrad and I are going to be doing a similar session to this there, and there's also some wonderful event content that'll come out at Cvent Connect if you're interested. So thank you all again for joining. Conrad, thank you, and wishing all of you a great day.